progressive one is the... So it's some... Ate.
Here I go, anti-anything.
Oh, oh.
It functions everywhere, sometimes without stopping, sometimes discontinuously. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits, it fucks. One mistake ever said the it everywhere. It is machines, not at all metaphorically. Machines of machines with their couplings, their connections. An organ machine is connected with a source machine. One emits a flux, which the other cuts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth, a machine coupled to that one. The mouth of the anorexic hesitates between an eating machine, an anal machine, a talking machine, a breathing machine, deeper machine, asthma, attack. This is why we are all tinkerers, each with their own little machines. An organ machine for an energy machine. There are always flux and cuts. Judge Schreber 5 has divine rays in his ass. Solar anus. And rest assured it works. Judge Schreber feels something, produced of something, and theorized about it. Something is being deduced effects of machines, not metaphors. Stroll of the schizophrenic. It's a better model than the neurotic lying on the couch. A bit of fresh air, a relationship with the outside. Take the stroll of Lenz into the outdoors. It is different from moments when Lenz finds himself with his good pastor, who forces him to situate himself socially in relation to God, in relation to Father, in relation to Mother. On the contrary, he is in the mountains under the snow with other gods or without God at all, without family, without father or mother, with nature. What does my Father want? Can he give me better? Impossible! Leave me alone. Everything is a machine. And three celestial machines, the stars are rainbows, alpine machines, each coupled with those of his body, noise machine. Uninterrupted, idling from matter. It must feeling of endless bliss to be in contact with the profound, life profound to every form. To have a soul for the rocks, metals, water, and plants, to welcome into oneself, as in a dream, every element of nature, like flowers that breathe with the waxing and waning of the moon. Både vilket landskap ger sig till where, både där i multidagen ned, inom the replies. Krongas can be a chlorophyllin machine or a photosynthesis machine, or at least slip his body as a part into such machines. Lenz put himself before the distinction of man nature, before all the identifications that this distinction conditions. He could not experience nature as nature, but as a process of production. There is no more man nor nature, only process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together. producing machine, desiring machine everywhere, schizophrenic machines, all generic life. Me and not me, exterior and interior don't mean anything anymore. It was me, Anti-Oedipus. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. The desiring machines. Machines.
Anti-Oedipus, Silver, Silver. Wissels af de tel, even penny pings. Dan kan ik wel, ja, look, in de agentje blijft de wissel. Worksvrouw.
Here I go, anti-Oedipus.
Is het een William Brixit one is day? So it's still some Ate.
Here I go, anti-Oedipus.
Ho, ho.
It functions everywhere, sometimes without stopping, sometimes discontinuously. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits, it fucks. One mistake ever said the it everywhere. It is machines, not at all metaphorically. Machines of machines with their couplings, their connections. An organ machine is connected with a source machine, one emits a flux which the other cuts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth a machine coupled to that one. The mouth of the anorexic hesitates between an eating machine, an anal machine, a talking machine, a breathing machine, deeper machine, asthma, attack. This is why we are all tinkerers, each with their own little machines. An organ machine for an energy machine. There are always flux and cuts. Judge Schreber 5 has divine rays in his ass. Solar anus. And rest assured it works. Judge Schreber feels something, produced of something, and theorized about it. Something is being deduced effects of machines, not metaphors. Stroll of the schizophrenic. It's a better model than the neurotic lying on the couch. A bit of fresh air relationship with the outside. Take the stroll of Lenz into the outdoors. It is different from moments when Lenz finds himself with his good pastor, who forces him to situate himself socially in relation to God, in relation to Father, in relation to Mother. On the contrary, he is in the mountains under the snow with other gods or without God at all, without family, without father or mother, with nature. What does my father want? Can he give me better? Impossible! Leave me alone. Everything is a machine. And three celestial machines, the stars are rainbows, alpine machines, each coupled with those of his body, noise machine. Uninterrupted, idling from matter. it must feeling of endless bliss to be in contact with the profound, life profound in every form. To have a soul for the rocks, metals, water, and plants, to welcome into oneself, as in a dream, every element of nature, like flowers that breathe with the waxing and waning of the moon. Och det lands att gissa ett way, hvor det är i multidagen in the replies. Krongas can be a chlorophyllin machine or a photosynthesis machine, or at least slip his body as a part into such machines. Lens. Put himself before the distinction of man nature, before all the identifications that this distinction conditions. He could not experience nature as nature, but as a process of production. There is no more man nor nature, only process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together. Producing machine, desiring machine everywhere, schizophrenic machines, all generic life. Me and not me, exterior and interior don't mean anything anymore. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. The desiring machines. Machines.
Anti-Oedipus, Silver, Grüße auf die Tell, Penny Pings. I can't go like, yeah, look, you agent your bites with it. Works, Frau.
Here I go, Anti-Oedipus.
Yes, it's a William Brixit one these days. So it's still some out there.
Here I go, Anti-Oedipus.
Oh.
It functions everywhere, sometimes without stopping, sometimes discontinuously. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits, it fucks. One mistake if I said the it everywhere. It is machines, not at all metaphorically. Machines of machines with their couplings, their connections. An organ machine is connected with a source machine, one emits a flux which the other cuts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth a machine coupled to that one. The mouth of the anorexic hesitates between an eating machine.
We are recording on the tubes now. We are live on the YouTube. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. As we continue further and further into the first positive task, sorry, the start was a little bit slow. It happens. What can I say? We are continuing in the first positive task of Schizoanalysis. I'm on page 333, not 133. 333 of Anti-Oedipus, and I figure we just head straight over to it. Why the fuck not? Where do I even say where we've been? We've been focusing on the death drive. Death drive in Freud is a fascinating turn that some people have, will say, embraced more than others. It's a big deal to some people, like the Nick Landys of the world. Other people don't give it quite. Okay. No idea what's happening with you. Intellectual Joker quit. Just wonderful. The death drive, Freud basically opposed to the life drive. The life drive, or libido, the drive towards procreation, the goal of procreation particularly, with the death drive as being sort of the opposition of that, or the drive towards death. These pushes, these drives are within us, modified by blah, 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 blah. And they've been basically going at the idea of the death drive, just as they spent most of the book going at the idea of the life drive. Oh, there's no streaming on Discord. I need to share that. That's my bad. That's okay. I technically haven't even started, so no one's missing anything yet on there. That should be fine. Their argument basically is to set up and say, hey, it's not so much that like death is a thing, or even the death drive is a thing. Death, as we've been talking about it, you know, a person dies or the end of their life happens and death occurs, is this odd transcendent quality that we've sort of assigned this large scale grand meaning. My death is coming, for example. But death is not really operant like that, because there isn't really a subject to die or a larger scale body to die. It's not really about that. What it's about really is the shift in how we understand the model of death being produced, and then how we then apply that model. So we have our daily experiences. We go about the shit we go about. And as we're going about things, we have the experience, the becoming, the creation of the intensities, the development of sort of the emergent life that every part of our body, every part of our existence is involved with. The intensities are developed through there. And in these intensities, there's these odd subjects, more or less, that are created that are, I use the example of Hungry Brooks, which is a very, very overly simplified version, because this is a very complex, meandering thing. But it's a little like that. It's these intensities are then consumed by various subjects. There's the, as they talk through Klosowski, we read Klosowski on this. There's the one who sort of conducts, you could say, these intensities, followed by the I that claims them as his own. And so what's happening is all these intensities are sort of being conducted, but they're being created and they go away. They're being created and they go away. And it's this consistent becoming process overall, this very complex series of elements that produce the subject that is the I that claims it as its own. And inside of that, all of those little intensities, all of those things are coming to and dying, because they're going away. They stop, they fade out, they go off. They die necessarily. Ooh, crackling. Am I crackling? Am I crackling in Discord? Fuck. Okay.
Only intermittently.
Very frustrating. What can I say? Let's see if I can undo a couple
Not that
of these.
often.
Is it happening right now?
No.
Okay. I'm going to get... it's fucking frustrating. All right. We'll see if this fixes things. I have no idea. Apologies for the crackles. Apologies. So what's happening is that in this becoming, the desiring machines coming together, producing intensities, there is dying in the sense of these things go away, but there isn't death. Instead, there's this very odd thing that is happening where we have the model of death sort of made for us constantly. And we have the experience of all of it. And then the BWO, which is the, you could say the entropic death, the heat death, the model of things that either we ascribe by or bounce off of. We have the things that happen, and then we have the model of them. If it happens, by the way, just literally type in chat. I need to fix this, and I need probably very frustrating. I may need to reboot the machine. It's okay. But as you sort of bounce towards death, which is the BWO, the model of things, the entropic heat death of things, you bounce back. And that thing bounces back, and the voice is still crackling. I went through, I did multiple hours last night, and there was zero crackling. I have done nothing to my computer. Now there's crackling. That's my favorite thing. Stay tuned for 2 seconds. Just don't go anywhere. Okay. So frustrating. So frustrating. All right. I'm going to just take a listen to myself real quick and just see if it's coming through. It's very clear for me. So, fuck. It's a goddamn computer issue. Frustrating. To continue and see if we survive any of this. The model of things includes the model of death that's continually happening sort of within us, within the process of becoming, necessarily sensations or intensities or whatever we name a thing. As I say, hungry Brooks is going to die. Thirsty Brooks dies. Intense Brooks, anxiety Brooks, frustrated with fucking computer Brooks. It's very, all those things die. They go away. I don't really, because I'm the collection of all of these and more. And so it's not so much that I really die as so much that I stop dying. Because death is change within me in the same way that at an ecological level, we talk about the forest burning literally being necessary as part of the growth of many forests. This is what's happening within us. This is what's happening to us. We are filled with little deaths, constant little deaths. And that's a phrase I'm using. They're going to be using in just a moment. And you'll kind of see why. And they're meaning it a little bit in that very fun French way, but they also mean it in the sense of like, this is part of that thing that is becoming. So then the question would be, we've got Freud, who now has this transcendent death instinct as principle, as setup. So why did he do this? Yes, the little death, le mort petit, is also the orgasm. Correct. Don't worry. That actually is a thing that will become useful knowledge in about a paragraph or two. I mean, they can't miss making that joke, can they? No one's able to. So we'll make our way through, and off we go. Let me see if I can enlarge this a little bit and scoot myself a little bit over. Apparently I can't because I'm really terrible at this, which is fine. Thank you. Thank you for doing that, OBS. It's clearly what I wanted to do by clicking the... All right. If one looks in this direction for the ultimate reason why Freud erects a transcendent death instinct as principle, the reason will be found in Freud's practice itself. For if the principle has nothing to do with the facts, it has a lot to do with the psychoanalyst's conception of psychoanalytic praxis, a conception the psychoanalyst wishes to impose. Freud made the most profound discovery of the abstract subjective essence of desire, libido. But since he re-alienated this essence, reinvesting it in a subjective system of representation of the ego, since he recoded this essence on the residual territoriality of Oedipus and under the despotic signifier of castration, he could no longer conceive the essence of life except in a form turned back against itself, in the form of death itself. And this neutralization, this turning against life, is also the last way in which a depressive and exhausted libido can go on surviving, and dream that it is surviving. Quote, "The ascetic ideal is an artifice for the preservation of life. Even when he wounds himself, this master of destruction of self-destructing, the very wound itself compels him to live. It is Oedipus, the marshy earth, that gives off a powerful odor of decay and death, and it is castration, the pious ascetic wound, the signifier that makes this death a conservatory for the Oedipal life. Desire is in itself not a desire to love, but a force to love, a virtue that gives and produces, that engineers, for how could what is in life still desire life? Who would want to call that a desire? But desire must turn back against itself in the name of a horrible ananke, the ananke of the weak and the depressed, the contagious neurotic ananke. Desire must produce its shadow, or its monkey, find a strange artificial force for vegetating in the void, at the heart of its own lack. For better days to come, it must, but who talks this way? What abjectness! Become a desire to be loved, and worse, a sniveling desire to have been loved, a desire that is reborn of its own frustration. No, Daddy, Mommy didn't love me enough. Sick desire stretches out on the couch, an artificial swamp, a little earth, a little mother. Quote, "Look at you, stumbling and staggering with no use in your legs. And it's nothing but your wanting to be loved which does it, a maudlin crying to be loved, which makes your knees go all ricky. Just as there are two stomachs for the ruminant, there must also exist two abortions, two castrations for sick desire, one in the family, in the familial scene with the knitting mother, another time in an asepticized clinic, in the psychoanalytic scene with specialist artists who know how to handle the death instinct and bring off castration and bring off frustration." Bring off is a fascinating phrasing there. I'm always getting a kick out of like how they sort of, I don't know, handle these things when they talk about it. Bring off is jerking off frustration, jerking off. That's the phrasing around this. It's jerking off. Bring off, make it orgasm, make it come, make it be there. That's kind of the thing. So, shall we try to take it bit by bit? Let's do that. Let's take it bit by bit. And I think the crackles have generally been fixed, but we'll find out. Guattari asks, have you done a Zizekian Deleuzian synthesis on the theory of desire? No. They're fairly incompatible theories. I mean, they're basically completely incompatible. Zizek is Lacanian, and he spends his time talking about the nature of lack and the dissociation from reality and the need for castration in order for desire to form in the first place, and desire then becomes what it does. For Deleuze and Guattari, desire is itself foundational and actually is the producer of lack. They're pretty much incompatible. So, that would be my quick answer. And now let's go to the paragraphs. If one looks in this direction for the ultimate reason why Freud erects a transcendent death instinct as principle, the reason will be found in Freud's practice itself. For if the principle has nothing to do with the facts, it has a lot to do with the psychoanalyst's conception of psychoanalytic practice, a conception the psychoanalyst wishes to impose. Basically, what they're putting forward is that the death instinct is not so much about Freud found the death instinct and he must include it, but more that the way that he was looking at building psychoanalysis from the start, necessitated sort of finding these other little elements in a very particular way. And the death instinct, Thanatos itself, isn't really about the empirical observation that he found by doing, studies or ethnological studies or spending time with people. Instead, pushing out as basically, I mean, they're going to come to say it. The whole point is that this sort of odd essence of desire and libido is made. And this is kind of what they go on to say, that we find this abstract essence. Freud made this amazing discovery. That's the idea. But the thing was, he did re-alienate the essence. He didn't allow it to be just simply libidinal drive, passions, and desire, a Nietzschean will to power, or the passions from even Spinoza, or again, there's a lot of thinkers who played with this. Instead, he elevated it, played with it differently, and moved it into the space where it became part of a subjective system of representation of the ego. He necessarily recodes this essence on the residual territoriality of Oedipus. He, instead of allowing it to be what it is, brings it into this more complex series of interactions. And this complex series of interactions, which has, we'll just say a few things that are probably critiquable, to put it lightly, what he ends up doing is actually taking this life force and actually turning it into the death drive by just, hey, here's what the life force does. Well, yeah, but we're in this space of representation and we've got all these other things, so obviously death comes with it, more or less. And this line they have here, the neutralization, this turning into life, is the last way in which a depressive and exhausted libido can go on surviving and dream it is surviving. This is a Nietzschean quote that follows it. The ascetic ideal is an artifice for the preservation of life. Even when he wounds himself, this master of destruction, of self-destructing, the very wound itself compels him to live. This is the will to power. This is that setup, that thing that they're playing with. Again, as I said, it's Freud's like making this odd move, but it's because it's this priest mentality, more or less. This is the ascetic ideal is an artifice for the preservation of life. And the ascetic ideal is the death drive. This is the same thing. This drive towards entropy, the drive towards nothingness. And so, really, it's about sort of, when Nietzsche talks about self-denial and the ascetic ideal, he's very rough on it. He's very rough on it. But he also makes a very clean point that without this, slave classes would not survive what they're doing, that they would not come through time, that we would find societies collapsing, because this sort of master-slave position itself it isn't operant, that you have to have these other pieces for him in order to make society functional, but again, not stable. It's not about stability for him. Basically, the ascetic ideal is an artifice for preservation of life given to the slave from the priest class. And when the slave or those who operate under it, when they wound themselves, and they do that, the very wound itself actually is a compulsion to live. It becomes a sort of source or fount for the will to power, the will to life. And this is, from there, they then make their point, and they say this is effectively what Oedipus is doing. Oedipus, the marshy earth that gives off an odor of decay and death. It is castration, the ascetic wound, the signifier that makes this death a conservatory for Oedipal life. These things work together and operate in this way. Desire is in itself not a desire to love. That's not what libido is. It's not a desire to love, but a force to love. There's a difference. Again, when people talk about this, we were watching an AO video where this kid was going sort of over this and talking about desire as want. And it's not that. Desire in itself is not a desire to love, but a force to love, a virtue that gives and produces, that engineers. For how could what is in life still desire life? Who would call that a desire? But desire must turn back against itself in the name of a horrible ananke. Ananke is Greek. It's a necessity, a perceived necessity, specifically. I think, you know what? Let me look that up before I fucking say something really stupid here. Boop, 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 boop. I believe that's what it is. Ananke was the personification of inevitability and necessity and compulsion, mother of the fates. So this perceived necessity, perceived inevitability. The desire must turn itself back against itself in the name of this perceived necessity. This perceived necessity of the weak and depressed, the contagious neurotic. Desire must produce its shadow, or its monkey. Must find a strange artificial force for vegetating in the void at the heart of its own lack. This is the way psychoanalysis sort of operates on itself. The desire finds itself sort of going through these things. Ultimately, it's creating a false version of itself centered on lack, but that is finding its own survival in it, as Nietzsche talked about. But the question is why? Like, for better days to come is kind of the idea. That's at center of the Oedipal sort of triangle is they use the phrasing the demure mother, but it's the idea that you repress and hold back sexual desire for your mother for a time when you'll be able to find your own mom to fuck. Essentially, I have an object of sexual desire here. I have a mom or whatever that I'm into, but I'm going to hold back because that's the proper way for me to have a relationship with her. I'm not going to have a sexual relationship. I will wait, and I will, at some day, a better day to come, I will find a woman who I can then love and fuck, and then can become a mom, and I can have my own mom to fuck. It's kind of the idea. And that days to come, I'm holding back because at some point it'll be worthwhile. I'm holding back because at some point I will be able to let go. At some point I will be able to be free. For better days to come, it must, but who talks that way? What abjectness become a desire to be loved, and worst, a sniveling desire to have been loved. There is a movement they're talking about here because, again, they're saying desire is not like the desire to love. It's a force to love. It's out. It's doing its thing. It's a force to love. And in this very turned upside down garbage that is psychoanalysis as it exists, it flips around and it instead becomes a desire to be loved, or worse, a sniveling desire to have been loved. Incels. There's one incels. Not incels, but I like the incel in all of us almost. That there is the neurotic position of the desire to be loved, or the sniveling desire to be loved, a desire reborn of its own frustration. This is, no, mommy, daddy didn't love me enough. They're being pretty mocking here. They're being pretty mocking here. And it's basically saying, like, it ends up being everything about these infantile complaints. Why don't you love me more? Why don't you love me more? Why doesn't mommy and daddy love me more? Everything returns to this because, again, it desire gets flipped in these ways. Desire becomes reduced to this false version of lack, but it is a force. It is not a desire. It doesn't become mutated. It gets malformed, and it gets moved in different positions. It's a force that has power behind it, and it's pushing and it's pushing and it's pushing. And that's kind of the next bit. They start talking about the sick desire. This is a desire that has been turned into this. Sick desire stretches out on the couch. An artificial swamp, a little earth, a little mother. This is the artificial conditions of the analyst couch that they're talking about. Stretches out on the couch. An artificial swamp, which is the room. A little earth, a little mother, the analyst. And then they have, following up with that quote, Look at you, stumbling and staggering with no use in your legs. Nothing but your wanting to be loved which does it. A maudlin crying to be loved which makes your knees go all ricky. Desire to be loved weakens you. That's it. It doesn't strengthen you. It weakens you. The desire to be loved weakens you. That, again, it's malformed. It's sick desire. This is the turn that psychoanalysis is taking. Just as there are two stomachs for the ruminant, cows. That's what it's not literally saying this. The ruminant is this is a digestive thing. The way that cud or the ruminant within cows has multiple stomachs that gets passed back and forth in order to sort of digest differently. Just like that, there must also exist two abortions, two castrations for sick desire. Once in the family, the familial scene with the knitting mother, another time in the asepticized clinic, in the psychoanalytic scene, with specialist artists who know how to handle the death instinct, to bring off castration and bring off frustration. This is basically saying that psychoanalysis, as it exists here, we do it at home and we form these people at home. And then we have the second part, which is in the clinical setting, with those who are not properly Oedipalized. And the death instinct properly is used this way. And the death instinct in this transcendent element is able to sort of, reproduce and reinforce that original thing that the familial setting did. That's the phrasing that they're using. So as we go through it, this is them talking about, again, the same core critique all the way through, which is probably not a shock to anyone, I don't think. But that is really where they're playing here. And it's a long, more of the same exact critique of sort of all of this shit. But instead of one sec. But ending with, I think, that point. These things are recreated. This malformed version of desire is reinforced and rebuilt and creates the neurotic, creates the sick person, creates these situations, and then is further hardened as the death instinct is used in this to reify and harden the way that desire is being malformed. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if the death instinct really is transcendent, if it exists at all. Well, yeah. I think they would agree. So hard for me to say otherwise. What's up, JK?
So Brooks, would it be correct to say that the Freud, by reifying the castration complex, right? Mm-hmm. He uses that castration complex to associate it with the death, and that becomes the death instinct as a principle for him, and so that becomes what Nietzsche calls the ascetic ideal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
the ideal is a kind of way to castrate, to obstruct life, the life force, in order to reify something higher, which Freud calls the death instinct as a principle. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think so. How they're describing, again, this is a critique of psychoanalysis. And so it's a unique phrase, a unique thing that they're playing with, to say the least, but it's a critique of it. So again, take it as a critique, which is the general thing they're sort of playing with. Does that make sense?
Whereas for Nietzsche, he uses the term amor fati, which is the life force, the life instinct, the will to power is really associated with the process of change and death. Death is a kind of a change, and so there's no reason to reify death because it's part of the life itself. Like in nature, everything constantly changes, dies, or gives way to what we call death, but it's really just part of the life force itself.
Effectively, yeah, they're talking about desire being malformed and used in this way, and then the death instinct being sort of created alongside it in order to sort of have this larger truss. But this truss is the thing that is making desire sick, so it becomes this sort of, I don't know, self-defeating instinct, more or less, that is then built in and creates a sick patient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. More or less. Again, I'm kind of oversimplifying as I'm doing it, but that's kind of the thing they're driving towards.
So would you say that for Nietzsche, there is no motto of death, right? Yeah, there is that's the difference, isn't it? For Freud, there is this motto of death, which is a kind of a death instinct as a principle.
Say that one more time.
So for Nietzsche, there would not be this motto of death that he's been talking about, right?
No. I shouldn't say it so cleanly. In my readings of Nietzsche, I don't see one quite as the way he's talking about it. But again, what they're doing is they're actually bringing in effectively Klosowski and Bergson and saying, and specifically Klosowski's reading of Nietzsche. So, because for Klosowski, it is very much in there. And there is a consistent and overall sort of repeating death inside of these things. One sec, let me see if I can find because for Nietzsche, the eternal return, the coming back, the repetition of that, the vicious circle is the resulting of a death of types, because you are aware of that repetition. And so necessarily the person who is experiencing it as you're going through right now, and you are right now aware of JK and I'm aware of Brooks and I'm thinking through my life, blah, 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 all that. At some point, I'm going to forget me. There's a death that occurs there. And that death is, again, the beginning of another circle, beginning of another cycle, beginning of another return. So there is death built into the vicious circle through Klosowski, and I can see that through Nietzsche, but it's a bit different than the death instinct.
Right, but if there's an eternal recurrence of the same, then death is just part of that same process of the will to power or life, the life instinct, life force. It's just it's part of the change, but it doesn't exist outside it, or yeah.
Let me see if I can find the quote because we did a reading this last weekend of part of Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle from Klosowski, which is where they quote, like 2 paragraphs ago, they quote like literally a passage in here. 2 seconds. I promise I'm still here. Just one moment. I mean, we read so much of this. I can't remember. We ended up just going back through. It was like 15 pages we read. It was wild. It's very, very lyrical, and I still adore it. Okay, so for Nietzsche, when we reach the sort of apex of the soul, the high tonality of the soul, there's a sort of meta hyper awareness of things, this tonality that comes from it. This similar to enlightenment, you might say, or satori, or something sort of extraordinary is happening, but there's this high tonality of the soul. So to just read a little bit Klosowski. Now let us suppose that during such a high tonality of the soul, an image of the circle is formed. This is the eternal return. Something happens to my thought in this sign. It regards itself as dead, as no longer my own. My thought enters into such a strict coherence with it that the invention of that sign, of the circle, takes on the power of all thought. Does this mean that the thinking subject would lose his own identity in a coherent thought that would itself exclude identity? There's nothing here to distinguish the designating intensity from the designated intensity, to reestablish coherence between the self of the world and as constituted by everyday designations. A single circuit brings me back to the code of everyday signs, and then makes me depart, again leaving me at the mercy of the sign as soon as I try to explain myself the event as soon as I try to explain to myself the event it represents. This process of things, this to the model and back, to the model and back, is also it's how Klosowski also reads The Eternal Return, to the model and back, to the model and back, model and back, as a thing. Yeah, I like that. We'll go with that. Here, let me add my camera in here. And that destroyed my camera. Excellent. One moment. And let's grab me. Go boop, boop, boop. There. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. That's a worthwhile little reading. But I do want to continue because the phrasing in the next little bit kind of continues that. If we remember, the first destructive task of schizoanalysis is sort of the dismantling or the destruction of representational investments, symbolic investments, the narrative that is tying these things together. It's kind of the first step of all of those things. It's important because we're coming back to that, and we're finally getting to what is the first positive act of schizoanalysis, which is the finding of the finding of the indices. There's a lot of I words that are in this, so it's a lot. I heard someone unmute for a moment. Maybe not. Fair enough. All right. We'll do the next little bit here. And, one sec. Is this really the right way to bring on better days? And aren't all the destructions performed by schizoanalysis worth more than the psychoanalytic conservatory? Aren't they more a part of an affirmative task? Lie down, then, on the soft couch which the analyst provides and try to think up something different. If you realize that he is not a god, but a human being like yourself with worries, defects, ambitions, frailties, that he is not the repository of an all-encompassing wisdom code, but a wanderer along the deterritorialized path, perhaps you will cease pouring it out like a sewer, however melodious it may sound to your own ears, and rise up on your own two legs and sing with your own God-given voice. To confess, to whine, to complain, to commiserate always demands a toll. To sing, it doesn't cost you a penny. Not only does it cost nothing, you actually enrich others instead of infecting them. The phantasmal world is the world which has not been fully conquered over. It is the world of the past, never of the future. To move forward clinging to the past is like dragging a ball and chain. We are all guilty of crime, the great crime of not living life to the full. You weren't born Oedipus. You caused it to grow in yourself, and you aimed to get out of it through fantasy, through castration. But this in turn you have caused to grow in Oedipus, namely in yourself. The horrible circle. Shit on your whole mortifying imaginary and symbolic theater. What does schizoanalysis ask? Nothing more than a bit of a relation to the outside, a little real reality. And we claim the right to a radical laxity, a radical incompetence, the right to enter the analyst's office and say, it smells bad there. It reeks of the great death and the little ego. I like that. This is a kind of on its face. I don't know if I necessarily need to go line by line in it, but I really, really dig this whole thing. Goddard says, is there a more efficient way to read philosophy? There's no efficient way to read philosophy, no. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't read philosophy. Because I have no idea how you interact with any of the books, and I have no idea how you come to them. I tend to recommend people read the books, find the things in them that they want to reference and that attracts them, and go read those things, and then come back. I tend to say the opposite of efficient. I have been reading Anti-Oedipus now for multiple years, 5+ years, once a week at least. And I am not done. And I've read a lot of books around it. And this is one book that just happened to have grabbed me. And it's reached me to other books that have grabbed me. This is not how it works. It is not efficient. No efficiencies. I'm sorry. Just terrible, isn't it? They made a comment earlier that I think we can go back to because they've kind of revisited it again. And it's, shouldn't psychoanalysis be a song of life rather than death? It's so odd and awful that this practice, which is about finding people who are hurting, finding people who are self-destructive, who are in pain, the horrifying reality of people who are neurotic, filled with anxiety, who are autistic, schizophrenic, they have an actual specific position that hurts. They hurt. They're hurting. And they go into a room and we close everything off. We darken it and we make them visit and live inside of that pain instead of giving them a place to sing, giving them a place that's positive, giving an exaltation of life. We do the opposite. This is them revisiting that after going through the death drive and after this critique of Freud around it. Because ultimately, the question for them, isn't the point to bring on better days? And is this weird way where we kind of revisit castration and we rebuild it, we rebuild Oedipus in people, is this really it? Is this how we bring better days? Or isn't it just basically doing the same shit? Aren't all the destructions performed by schizoanalysis worth more than the psychoanalytic conservatory? Aren't they more part of an affirmative task? Again, the destructive task is not something separate from all of these other things. That's not how this works. It's not how they're talking about it as well. It's more than that. We're building, we're doing more things with it. These are the things that but it's worth more. This other thing is kind of this stagnant, hyper repressive, brutal things. And they're like, isn't that awful? And then they have this long piece. I keep forgetting who this is from. Let me see. 2 seconds. Because it's... 1 second. I have my footnotes ready to go. I should have footnotes always ready to go. I should just keep a fucking PDF of this thing up instead of just searching and doing that. It's Henry Miller. Of course, it's fucking Henry Miller. Henry Miller, wonderful, wonderful writer that they really, really, really love. I'll just read there's a little bit of ellipses and things added just to read the original, which is lyrical too. Miller's great. This is from Sexus. Lie down then on the soft couch which the analyst provides. Try to think up something different. The analyst has endless time and patience. Every minute you detain him means money in his pocket. Whether you whine, howl, beg, weep, cajole, pray, or curse, he listens. He is just a big ear minus a sympathetic nervous system. He's impervious to everything but truth. If you think it pays to fool him, then fool him. Who will be the loser? If you think he can help you and not yourself, then stick to him until you rot. That's a fucking Miller. That's a fucking great line. Sorry, I know LJ. anyone who's been in therapy or dealt with therapy, it's just that phrasing is so fucking good. He has endless time and patience. Every minute you detain him means money in his pocket. He's a big ear minus a sympathetic nervous system, which is such a fucking good line. And that's that. All of this is kind of, again, continuing that. To sing, it doesn't cost you a penny. Not only does it cost nothing, you actually enrich others instead of infecting them. The phantasmal world is the world which has not been fully conquered over. It's the world of the past, never the future. To move forward, we should get Sexus out. I feel like I just want to get Sexus out at this point. God damn, this is so good. I don't even know if I have my copy of Rosy Crucifixion anymore. It's so good. Let's see. PDF. We should do a Henry Miller reading. We really should. Is this going to be limited preview? Fuck you every time. We'll come back to it. So they read this passage from Miller where he's just going on exactly in the same tone, exactly in the same style as we were sort of just talking about. This is Miller's jam. Miller's not a fan of psychotherapy, as you may guess from how he talks about it here. The whole thing ends with them saying, "You weren't born Oedipus. You caused it to grow in yourself." The Oedipus complex is not an innate thing. This is not something that is a priori part of the human condition. It's not any of those elements. It is something that is built. It is something that is self-created. And they don't mean that you like put it together, but that you made it within yourself through the familial relations and the setup. And as they say, you aim to get out of it through fantasy, through castration. And they're being very particular about their usage here, but it's, you want to escape all of this through the diving into these symbolic, non sort of material, non libidinal filmed fantasies, this disconnection, story worlds, fantasy worlds, your own fantasy world, whatever it may be, the way you see things, the way you can tell you find your way through it by hoping you can escape through fantasy, through castrating yourself, through castrating everything. But in turn, you have caused to grow in Oedipus, in yourself. This is the horrifying circle. And for them, they say, should on your whole, mortifying imaginary symbolic theater. That's directly at Lacan and Lacanian psychoanalysis. What does schizoanalysis ask? Nothing more than relation to the outside, a little reality. We claim the right to laxity and incompetence, the right to enter the analyst's office and say it smells bad. It reeks of the great death and the little ego. This is straight up like points out of Guattari's other work. But again, Deleuze doesn't disagree with him on this. This is their critique. The psychoanalytic expert sits there. They say that they know stuff. The counselor, the psychiatrist, again, this is not just squarely at one type. This is all of this. Hey, it's like, what about the outside world? What about more? What about allowing the non-expert? As they say, the radical incompetence, the radical laxity, giving room to the patient, the analyst, and to do these things and to say these things and to be kind of where they're at. And be aware that very much the great death and the little ego is that horrifying thing that the traditional practice of psychoanalysis builds. And they kind of continue, and it is where you start to see a little bit more of their critique of all of this come through. This is a lovely, lovely quick paragraph. But before we go, I just want to ask, anyone got a thing? Anyone got a note, a question, other stuff? It's okay if not. Yeah, they're continuing their critique, and they're kind of, we're working our way towards that first positive task. They spoke of it. We have the destructive happening with the first positive task, that during the destruction of the symbolic elements, you basically, as you go, be looking for the indices of actual of libidinal investment. And all you have are indices, not larger scale symbols or fantasies. It is purely indices. So don't go, oh, they have a car there. They must really like cars. Their father owned a car. I wonder if there's something about the father. It's like, no, indices. And it's kind of a different type of beast than that. And, I mean, it's going to continue, because now we're getting into the worst part of psychoanalysis, which is capital and how capital affects it. And as again, they went through in chapter 3, the formation of capital. Capital is not just money. Money has existed in one form or another in a lot of different ways. It is not just money. Instead, capital is the element within the socius that is determinative of, or seems to be the quasi-cause, or seems to be quasi-determinate of the things that happen socially. So it is, as we like to say, the market, the invisible hand of the market does things. And it's like, well, what the fuck does that even mean? Well, this is how capital functions. It determines things this way. Sorry, I'm doing my cranes as we're talking. 31. Got only 969 to go. To continue reading. Freud himself indeed spoke of the link between his discovery of the death instinct and World War I, which remains the model of the capitalist war. More generally, the death instinct celebrates the wedding of psychoanalysis and capitalism. Their engagement had been full of hesitation. What we've tried to show apropos of capitalism is how it inherited much from a transcendent death-carrying agency, the despotic signifier, but also how it brought about this agency's effusion into the full immanence of its own system, the full body, having become that of capital money, suppresses the distinction between production and anti-production. Everywhere it mixes anti-production with the productive forces in the imminent reproduction of its own always widened limits, thanks to the axiomatic. The death enterprise is one of the principal and specific forms of the absorption of surplus value in capitalism. It is this itinerary that psychoanalysis rediscovers and retraces with the death instinct. The death instinct is now only pure silence in its transcendent distinction from life, but it effuses all the more throughout all the imminent combinations it forms with the same life. Absorbed, diffuse, imminent death is the condition formed by the signifier in capitalism, the empty locus, that is everywhere displaced in order to block the schizophrenic escapes and place restraints on the flights. We'll come back to the next paragraph, but I want to kind of step through this one a little bit. Calling World War I the model of capitalist war, it's worth taking a moment on, because when we talk about how these things come to be, or how war comes to be, or when capitalism showed up and how capitalism showed up and how these things form, again, what drove World War I as a World War I as a sort of idea versus other wars that were very much global? What made these different? What made World War I separate? These are the things that they're playing into, where it's like, hey, this odd moment, because as Freud wrote, the link between his discovery of the death instinct and World War I, he even mentioned this. Freud connected the death instinct to World War I. It was his explanation of why the war happened. He played directly into that. And he specifically, more generally, they say, the death instinct celebrates the wedding of psychoanalysis and capitalism, their engagement full of hesitation. Early writing of Freud, as he was sort of exploring this and sort of playing at these things, there wasn't really this full merging as a thing up front. Not with Freud. It took a bit, and World War I was kind of, for Freud, It's a horrible explanation, by the way. I'm trying. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm trying. World War I, boys being boys. I didn't say that, Wick. So World War I really hit, especially in Europe, people very differently than other previous wars that existed between states. The thing that really pushed it was that there was underlying it this deep economic competition between these large-scale economic and imperial powers, right? Like Britain, France, and Germany, they were in competition actively for various markets, various resources, territories, alliances in other countries, and all this stuff. And right before it happened, there had already been a significant investment in sort of, I don't want to say expecting the war, but it was a little bit of that, where we started to see industrialization be used for the production of war machine equipment, guns, whatever it was, grenades, rations, military outfits, all that stuff. And as Wig mentions, and of course Deleuze read Lenin. Who fucking hasn't read Lenin? Who's got a great book on Lenin? Zizek. Zizek has 2 fantastic books on Lenin. I highly, highly recommend them. But Lenin really, really took to World War I as like this perfect example of this imperialist war. Can't remember the name of the piece he did it in. Because for him, it was about how capitalist nations necessarily were seeing their borders or the power that they were exerting in the world slamming up against each other. And this slamming up against each other created tension and strain as resources are scarce and markets need to be expanded. And so as it happened, and if you don't know the story, World War I didn't sort of end with World War I. We have this thing as an event, but there was a massive wealth transfer that occurred not only during the war, but I would say literally right afterwards. Imperialism, the latest stage of capitalism. Oh, yeah. Is that what it's called? Really? God, I can't remember that. It is a book on capitalism called Imperialism. Lenin had a lot of good writing, to be perfectly frank. Sorry, he sucked in other ways, but he had a lot of good writing, I think, overall. But again, ultimately what it did is it led to this insane wealth transfer and became the groundwork for what would become World War II. Is the Zizek book about Lenin parallel? Actually, you won't even believe what Zizek called his book on Lenin. Lenin. It's very creative. I know. I think one of them is called Lenin 2017, which is, I appreciate that one. I like that one more. But World War I led to World War II. Like I can name a lot of ways, and I don't think there's a lot of disagreement there. It was a weird war that was hyper-imperialist and ended up doing a whole lot of really dumb, bad shit. So when we talk about like how capitalism builds, and this was for Lenin the thing, capitalism sort of builds destruction into its very process. For Freud, this was the death instinct sort of taking off. The destruction of things was part of it. It was his way of sort of handling or parsing the reality of what is a fucking awful war. World War I was like terrifying in a lot of ways, like really gross shit. Mustard gas and like warfare in ways that we were so gross we outlawed them, even though we'd totally do them all the time. It was so gross that like people went, we should not do that shit again. That was awful. And this sort of weird thing that happened, all of that stuff that was invested, this is the destruction of capital, the destruction of lives, destruction of land, the destruction of extraordinary amount of shit, but it's built into capitalism. For Freud, it was the death instinct sort of at the core of this. And for them, they're like, how fucked up is that? That's the thing. That's not what's going on. That's not the setup at all. Instead, what they're saying, we've tried to show how it inherited from this death-carrying agency, this despotic signifier, but also how it brought about this agency's effusion into the full immanence of its own system. The full body, having become that of capital money, this is the sort of big play they're making here, the full body becoming that of capital money suppresses the distinction between production and anti-production. And anti-production, again, is not lack per se. It's more the production expended in the maintenance of the system. Anti-production. It's not really productive because the system or the structure doesn't really do anything, but it's the maintenance of that. So there's this odd set of forces. It's kind of destructive, but also productive. These things are together, and everywhere these things are mixed as the limits get widened, as the axiomatic enables wider limits, larger setups, larger excuses, larger reasons, larger justification. And capitalism ultimately combines the destruction with production as it continually expands boundaries through its internal logic. This internal logic is where we see the axiomatic formed. Again, axiomatic via set theory. It's internal logic, the presupposed elements within these things. The death enterprise is one of the principal and specific forms of the absorption of surplus value in capitalism. Death industries, and there's a lot of these. Think of it as money that doesn't go towards actual production or making the world better, but instead sort of just gets consumed. And the military just is a place of consumption. We have $100 million planes that, because this happened the other day, aircraft carrier turns too fast, which in my head, I know what I have in my image is more comedic than anything, but I still think it's funny. But it turns too fast, and a fucking F-15 or some other fucking plane just skates off the edge and goes into the ocean. We lose $100 million. Like, whoop, gone. But it's consumed. Whether it crashes, whether it's destroyed, whether it falls off a boat, it is consumed capital. It's the end of that productive cycle. It never makes anything. Blowing up a country doesn't produce anything. Killing people doesn't produce anything. It's the end point. This is the end of it. This is these death-oriented industries are ways that capitalism captures the excess value of the system it's producing and utilizes it as well. And so this is what World War I, again, as Lenin wrote about, and that's kind of what they're carrying through here. Lenin wrote about imperialism as this sort of next step of capitalism, but also how it comes together in this sort of consistent need to expand and have this excess. Well, this is excess being blown off in the battalion sort of way of sort of the excess, the accursed share of things that sort of necessarily needs to be dealt with. The death enterprise is a principal and specific form of the absorption of surplus value in capitalism. It is this itinerary that psychoanalysis rediscovers and retraces with the death instinct. Psychoanalysis, because of how the death instinct came to be, follows the same path through capitalism. And it seems and plays as this like external to life thing. So does capitalism. So does war. All these things seem like they're external to our general productive. We talk about the defense industry. It is a defense industry. People work for it. Materials are used there. Materials are consumed there. And everything's destroyed. It's an end point. It's not the same thing as, even I build computers. Well, those computers are then used by other companies that are then productive in turn and are building things or doing stuff. That's more of a cyclical kind of, creation, but it creates this upward consistent amount of power, the excess and more profits being spent off. We need to figure out something to do with this excess. Well, I've got an idea. The death instinct becomes that model because again, we keep returning to it. It's this now exists. The death instinct, as they say, is now only pure silence in its transcendent distinction from life. It's necessarily considered distinct from the life force because 1, Freud, 2, capital, 3, the way that all of these things work together within the family. That seems outside of it. And again, their critique, as we've gone through last week and now this week, is that death is actually infused into life, that these are models of things that we bounce back off of, but actually aren't just death. Like death as a thing isn't really a thing. It's more like, again, the symbolic position that is larger scale thing that sort of is a leftover or introduced to us by this other stuff. There's a different play here. Absorbed, diffuse, imminent death is the condition formed by the signifier in capitalism. The symbolic capitalism creates images, creates symbols, plays with representation in this way. This death that we've been talking about is formed by the signifier in capitalism, this empty locus that is everywhere displaced in order to block the schizophrenic escapes and place restraints on the flights. This death, this anti-production that's able to maintain the system and is done to maintain the system and it is expended to maintain, because again, the system doesn't build. Like a system doesn't build. The system is just an organization. It's not actually productive. It exists to block the strange, the weird, the new. And again, maintenance of the system is literally maintenance of the system. I think that's how I'd probably phrase the end of that. And it's how death sort of plays through all of these things. Lenin's book is translated as Imperialism, Highest Stage of Capitalism in English. That's what I thought. I was confused. I was like, latest stage? I don't remember that. It's mistranslated. Color me shocked. Color me shocked. Anthromarx, is it true schizoanalysis has no political program? I mean, they literally say that. The closest I could say they have a political program is that they want to change psychoanalysis, but I'm not sure, like, what would be the form of governance that would work under schizoanalysis? That's not really a thing that they go through, and it's not really a thing that I think is a justifiable claim. You can run with it, and I think there's a lot of really good works that sort of play on what, in theory, their form of governance or how these things play together, but it's a bit like saying, my reading of Marx is a little different than most. A lot of people, when they read Marx and they sort of begin talking about what he did, they're like, or when they don't read Marx, I should say, they're like, oh, he's just communist. And it's like, sort of, but he's doing it through a critique, and he's not like stating that this is the only way to be. It's like, this is the process. These are the things. Here's the contradictions. Here's what it'll lead. He's doing a lot of amazing work, but it's not really like a book Lenin would write to actually just name someone who did this, or Castro or Shea or others who have very explicit political agendas. Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus, they don't have that in the same way. It's a very different type of anarchy even, because that's, I think, part of what they would say, and it's what Holland gets into and other writers. It's like, oh, let's say we just had anarchy tomorrow. Like, why would we not just recreate all of this again? Like, the reason that capitalism came to exist is not because suddenly capitalism showed up. It's a series of interactions from elements and all kinds of different social machines that developed a different type of subjectivity and also separated the king symbolic from kind of what he does and moved him into capital, money. It shifted our relationships with everything. These are very, 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 very large scale changes. And it would be like saying, so did they advocate that capitalism should necessarily come? It's like, that's not really the setup. Their thing is more, well, Deleuze's thing, I should say, is more, hey, we want new, so come up with new shit, do new shit, and here's kind of some ways to do new shit and also get rid of some old shit, because new shit's cool, more or less. There's a wonderful book called, Guillaume wrote it, I think. I always have it upstairs. I always have it upstairs at my bedside, and I don't know why. State and Marx, which is a book on Deleuze and Guattari and Marx. And it's on the nature of the state, because it's one of the things that people don't really spend a lot of time on, is that tiny little chapter called the Urstaat, and the formation of the state and how the state comes about. It's really, 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 really important. It's fantastic. Zizek's book on Lenin, Revolution at the Gates. That is his other one, yes. And then Lenin, what was it? Lenin 2017, I believe. Yeah, Lenin 2017. Remembering, repeating, and working through. I really appreciated it, because it was it's 100 years after the seizure of power in 1917 that Zizek wrote it, and kind of brought back a lot of his very, I would say, very interesting. One sec. Pop it in. I'll pop it the link to Amazon QC. I don't know if I have a PDF of it. I think I do. Yep, I do. I do. That one was not it. I don't know why that copied that PDF in. That was ridiculous. I don't know why it chose to do that one, Windows. Good job, you failure of a system. There, Lenin 2017. Very, very good. Big fan, big fan. And then Revolution at the Gates is the other one, which I'm popping in there too. But his book on violence also has Lenin in there, but I'm not including that. Let's see. Has the audio been okay so far? Since I made the thing where I was like, I promise it's working. Oh, State and Marx is the other one. And give me 2 seconds. State and Politics. Sorry, State and Politics. And this is going into the chat again in the QC. It's from Guillaume Sibertin-Blanc, Deleuze and Guattari on Marx. It is a beast of a book, but it is... I make the joke when we go through it and we get to the section on the Urstaat, it's like, I wish, like 3-4 years ago, I was like, I wish someone would write something about this, because it's like, we tend to believe and we tend to think of the state as this transcendent element that is something that's sort of necessary. We're taught this. I was taught this very, very early on, that the way we function is with a state, but the state doesn't work like that. It's not only are there amazing, amazing books, Society Against the State from Klastras as an example, but there's an extraordinary number of books that just kind of go into, hey, by the way, that's not really how it worked. Well, then how did we get the idea of the state? Not just Klastras like Society Against the State, what happened before or how it came about, but like, what are the material conditions that enable it, and what is the setup? What is the structure of it that actually is repeated? And that State and Politics, which is this book, is just a deep dive into that. It is, if you have not read a lot of Deleuze and Guattari's work, it is a bear. It is a bear, and I'm just going to say it's a bear to get through. I don't necessarily say that you shouldn't try it. If you have not read Marx, it's going to be really difficult. And you don't need to have read all of Marx. It will help, but if you just make your way through like Das Kapital and I would say whatever, the one I'm never able to pronounce, but I can type out, Grundrisse. The grunting book, you'll be fine if you've made it through that. You don't have to have read all of Marx. It helps. It's like things help, but it's Grundrisse. It's not gonna. I don't care. The Grunt book. This is it's people just need to stop naming things difficult things. Now back to Anti-Oedipus, where we talk about deterritorialization and the body without organs. And yeah, Yes, a little bit of a humor. That's the idea. I recommend State and Politics. It's excellent. State and Politics is excellent. Means Foundation. Let's call it Foundation. And so that way we can replace the fucking shitty Isaac Asimov book. Marx wrote Foundation first, and it's not shitty. Right? There you go. Just call it Foundation. We don't have to have everything be in the original tongue, do we? I don't think we do. Maybe we do. Maybe we need that. Maybe that's what everyone wants. That's fine. Plus, it lets people be really, really... there's this National Lampoon's Little Weapon, back when National Lampoon was funny. Emilio Estevez, Samuel L. Jackson comedy with Whoopi Goldberg, William Shatner, and Dennis Leary. It's a weird... Kathy Ireland, weird-ass movie. But there's this great scene where they go down to the fake Hannibal Lecter, and they're talking back and forth, and he's just up his own ass, as you expect. And the guy who plays him, he's great. Good actor, too, and it's funny they got him for this role. But he goes, quid pro quo, Mr. Colt. And he goes, what does that mean? He goes, it means I'm pretentious. This was like one of the best fucking lines. So, anytime someone says, like, no, Brooks, it's pronounced Grundrisa, it's like, what does that mean? Oh, well, translated, it means I am pretentious. Basically where my brain goes. Every time. Let's talk about zombies, though. How does that sound to everyone? Zombies sound good? I think zombies sound good.
Okay, Brooks, I have been waiting for this going to the next paragraph. You know, when the first time I started watching The Walking Dead, because it just sounded like that's something everybody was watching at the time, even before I arrived in the United States, I had this strange sense, you know, I think it's probably about this despotic, because in a lot of literatures in other countries, these massive scale post-apocalyptic theme is just not that interesting, right? So for me, it gave me a very, very strong sense of fetishism. You know, it's almost exactly the same, the thing that people talk about when they teach Marxism in classrooms, when they talk about commodity fetishism. But for me, it's not exactly the same thing. But I don't know how I have this fetishism sensation that when I was watching these, and I just had the strangest reaction. I was thinking, people enjoy this for relaxation, for what purposes? I was asking this question.
Well, I have a real particular, now granted I've had personal dealings with his company, but hey, what can I say? Walking Dead I have an actual history with. I like the first season, but to me, Kirkman and what he does is basically suffering porn. Now, the zombie as a trope is really fascinating, and it is decidedly, despite not being American, like it's not. The zombie is literally a word that is not American. Comes from Caribbean nations and various practices. But we co-opt everything. We love shit. It becomes ours. So I guess white people invented zombies now. But even how we did and where it came, like the first big zombie movies that really broke out always played with, one, xenophobia, but two, consumerism. There's a reason that you end up with, you know, the first big place that anyone ever holds up in the zombie movies is the mall. And again, this is particular, and it's a commentary that the people who make these movies are very aware of, and even explicit about. It's American consumers are like this, X, Y, and Z. They do these things, but other places they don't have the same ring to it, and so you have this really fascinating side to it. And then with video games, zombies are a wonderful thing for video games because they give you an excuse to kill things. It's a sort of automated, built-in, get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not like Nazis, because Nazis, there was a big controversy that hurts my brain that happened, that people were upset about the latest Wolfenstein games when they came out because you killed Nazis. And The Nazis were mad about that. It was a real thing. It's a real thing. And they were mad. And the alt-right was really mad that you killed Nazis. Which still blew my mind. But there's no zombies. There's no zombie council or like angry group of zombies on Twitter. That's not really how it works. And so it's a get out of jail free card for killing very particular people. And you can kind of get away with it. That's why The Walking Dead really plays into this by having people turn. And there's no rhyme or reason or logic to it. Because again, it's not about rhyme or reason or logic to any of it. But you get to kill your loved ones. You actually get to murder your loved ones. And not only that, but you have to kill your loved ones because they're turning. And that's
okay.
So
that's quite interesting, actually. I think for me, what draws me towards these suffering porn, whatever you call it, I remember, listening to you talk about suffering porn in a few other episodes. But I was thinking, okay, so, there is this almost spontaneously happening drive or these sensations that transcends beyond death and life or transcends between different kind of people. For me, it was interesting. However, my interest was more on these, how the setups of these places are always in these little towns that looks like some middle of nowhere Midwest in the United States, where everybody goes to a single giant Walmart and then do drug in the back street. Like, for me, it all aligned together, but it speaks to the space. How when I was living in Europe and other countries, the relations with the space and architecture is almost the opposite of whatever was in these kind of suffering porns. Because when I look at the sentence that says, oh, these signifiers that displaced some things in order to block the escape, right? So I feel like in the more traditional or, a lot of these European cities, the space and architecture, it almost holds certain kind of signifier position, or it allows a certain kind of escape if you put your mind into it. That's why, a lot of these things. But in these...
just real quick on that, just because it's worth a note on this, and I've spent too much time having these discussions. I was working at disclosure. I was working at Starbreeze on the Walking Dead video game as part of the team before I quit. So I know Walking Dead. I was working on a VR project for it. I know Walking Dead too well. But there's some very specific things you're talking about that is actually worthwhile. So let's go back to the first big zombie movie, Dawn of the Dead. Like it's one of the all-time fucking greats, and it takes place in the Midwest in a car, in a mall. And one of the things that's very specific about it is how it goes about this. And the original makers of the films and people since then have talked about this kind of odd thing that you end up in a very particular place with zombies that's needed. And if you watch like 28 Days Later, for example, or any of the other 28 weeks, or I guess we're going to have 28 years later, I think is coming soon. These tend to take place in cities, and city zombies is a different conversation when you try to have it and you set it up in Europe. It can be done very, very well. But because of the way that cities tend to be organized, which is they tend to be organized in ethnic pockets, cultural pockets, and building pockets, that as you walk around a city, if you've lived in one, especially in Europe, but I would say it's true of New York or anywhere else, you kind of know the area you're in. And when I say the area, if I were to say like the kind of people, and I kind of mean race and culture, you kind of can be in a spot. And zombie movies are really troublesome to make there because of that. It's not just random bad guys. It's not just random enemies. It is your heroes and then whatever area of the city they happen to be in. It's why you retreat to the mall. With this, the mall is actually a blank slate. It's a utility building. It isn't a place where necessarily people go to shop. That's what we do there. But that isn't like the thing a mall is. The mall includes shops for people, but it's a utility building first and foremost. It doesn't have signifiers beyond, hey, do stuff here. Please use me. Please use me. Like that's kind of all it's got. Please use me as a thing. And so people can go there and there's no rules about who's in charge or who's on top like there is in a city. There's no rules about who's on bottom. It's a neutral place, ostensibly. Again, there's lots of rules around capitalism, but the reason that malls work for zombie movies is because there's not really these rules in the same way when it comes to like how people engage culturally or who's on top or who's on bottom. And so it shifts how we deal with those things, and it gives room to make the enemies anyone. And nameless and faceless and just a horde of mindless other consumers who just aren't as good as we are because they've lost who they are and they're manic inside of the same place we are. We know how to use the mall. They don't, kind of mentality.
Yeah. You know, this is actually almost exactly the same thing I was kind of studying from a long time ago when I was feeling, you know, why is the space so different? I feel like it's because, you know, they have these naturalistic schizoid boundaries between different groups, you know, through languages, through customs. And in a lot of these European cities, even if there's a lot of refugees sometimes, you see that they still maintain a very, very firm boundary about their own group versus the out. And they don't necessarily have a lot of conflict with the outgroups, but they are very tight knit. And in a lot of these countries, and especially their city centers, they do not have a lot of these giant malls. You know, they don't have these very, you know, like, okay, everybody just go there, do whatever. You know, it's very much, you know, there's no hierarchy. Everybody play a role, but it's not like there's a better role or a lower role. They don't have that. You know, all of their shop centers, all of their utilities, it's completely spread out in the living quarters, in the living centers, which is very much, you know, a lot of these buildings are built like hundreds, even thousands of years ago. So for me, I feel like these, you know, boundary of what is blocked off and then what is not blocked off is very much matching whatever is said in the last sentence, that the empty locus that is everywhere to block the escape, to play the restraints on these flights. So for me, these cookie cutter architecture in these suffering porns, I feel like that's exactly what they're exactly one of the examples of these blockages, because it goes beyond, you know, it feels like it's very aloof. You know, you live in these cookie cutters, but it's almost not really for human living. You know, it's compared to a lot of the historical living conditions. These cookie cutter conditions are so mass produced and so removed from the scales of human space that it becomes that block. So for me, this is a thing that I've been studying long before I even know what schizoanalysis is. I wonder what you think of these different styles of architecture, especially within the so-called Midwest area, right? Because
well, I mean, so first off, the biggest thing you can do if you're interested in this is go read Daniel Smith's translation of Le Pli, the Fold, where Deleuze talks about the Baroque and Leibniz, which is a very particular movement in architecture and art. And he touches in on a more than a few of these things.
Yeah, a lot of my own recent architecture, sculptures are very much Baroque at the same time. So I think maybe I'm hitting somewhere. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you enjoy that.
I have the full name of the book in the chat, so I can just look it up.
The Fold, but you want the Daniel Smith translation, which let me just put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat before we're done here, because the translation you buy at the store is fucking terrible. Like famously bad. Not just Brooks says it's bad, but like holy shit. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. I'm tossing it in. It's
nice.
A significantly better translation. And it's about the folds. And I'm doing origami as I'm talking about it. So what can I say? There's Zombie movies and the mythos around them is fascinating. Shaun of the Dead, someone brings up in chat, fucking I love Shaun of the Dead, but it takes place in a town. Now imagine a slightly different version of that where, like, and this is why it's built in very particular ways. I almost would want to see this because I'd be curious what someone would do with it. But imagine if a couple of white people end up in a primarily black suburb during a zombie outbreak and are being attacked like that. It becomes instantaneously signifying in a very different way. It's one of the reasons that in Shaun of the Dead and most zombies movies, people stay in their area because it is primarily not about killing the other, but again, killing yourself, killing those like you, killing and having sort of the drive to and the freedom to or the demand to kill those you love, family members and others. It's why zombie movies work the way they do and play very heavily into that. I find it a very interesting distinction. There's a Black Rain did a very daring thing for me where they actually have a take on people going effectively cross country during one. Very well filmed the first season. I really loved it. Which is great. I'm not going to go into why because spoilers, but it's very much worth watching. And then there's a British series called, was it In the Flesh? I think it was called In the Flesh. Yeah. Which is post-zombie outbreak where they actually have a cure. And so all these ex-zombies who are all visually fucked up, you can denote them and they're very clearly seen as others, who they are. Go back home after the massive war and outbreak. I really enjoy that. I think it's the allegory is powerful for me, and it's very well done. I think they did a pretty good job with it. So worth mentioning. Let's see. Cool. We're gonna do the next section. Let's keep moving this. I think. Let me get that up. Let me see. To continue, the only modern myth is the myth of zombies, mortified schizos good for work, brought back to reason. In this sense, the primitive and the barbarian, with their ways of coding death, are children in comparison to modern man and his axiomatic. So many unemployed are needed, so many deaths. The Algerian War doesn't kill more people than weekend automobile accidents, planned death in the Bengal, etc. Oh, that last one. I always hate when 50-year-old references that are slightly sarcastic have meaning. Hate when that happens. Modern man, quote, raves to a far greater extent. His delirium is a switchboard with 13 telephones. He gives his orders to the world. He doesn't care for the ladies. He's brave, too. He's decorated like crazy. In man's game of chance, the death instinct, the silent instinct, is decidedly well played, perhaps next to egoism. It takes the place of zero in roulette. The house always wins. So, too, does death. The law of large numbers works for death. It is now or never that we must take up a problem we had left hanging. Once it is said that capitalism works on the basis of decoded flux as such, how is it that it is infinitely further removed from desiring production than were the primitive or even the barbarian systems which nonetheless code and overcode the flux? Once it is said that desiring production is itself coded and deterritorialized production, how do we explain that capitalism, with its axiomatic, its statistics, performs an infinitely vaster repression of this production than do the preceding regimes, which nonetheless did not lack the necessary repressive means? We have seen that the molar statistical aggregates of social production were in a variable relationship of affinity with the molecular formations of desiring production. What must be explained is the capitalist aggregate. What it must be explained is that the capitalist aggregate is the least affinal at the very moment it decodes and deterritorializes with all its might. This is a paragraph setting up, so we're not going to get explanations for things I'm about to say. We're going to just talk through what they're saying The explanations are in the next bit, and we are not necessarily reading the next bit. So just warning ahead. Next bit probably comes next week because it is a lot. A lot. They talk about the modern myth of zombies, and I like the way that they phrase this here. Mortified schizos, good for work, brought back to reason. There's some very specific phrasing here. The people who cannot be dealt with, the people who are at the excesses, people at whatever position, they are the mortified. But they're good for work. They're brought back to reason. Fucking unbelievable. People who are dead to society, unproductive. They want brains, quite literally. They want brains. They have a drive. They're able to focus. They're able to do those things. They're able to be brought back to reason. We don't, as a thing, the zombies have a drive. They do stuff. They get towards that. Remember, schizos, as they're talking about it, this is not schizophrenics as we necessarily mean it today. This is the clinical condition that Guattari was working with and that Deleuze is talking about from 1970 and 72. So when we talk about the mortified schizos, let me see in the original French what that phrasing is. 1 second. Because it's 2 seconds. This is not even a beginning of a paragraph. I love when that happens. It's my favorite thing. Have I told all of you people it's my favorite thing? It's the fucking middle of another set of paragraphs. All of these is like one paragraph. It's very frustrating. Les mythes modernes, la suite of zombies. They phrase it as schizos mortifies, which is mortified schizos, but that's mortified has a very different connotations. So if I say mortified, again, we tend to use these things improperly. I'm not saying otherwise, but this is more complicated than I think. I'm mortified. I don't think that's quite what they mean. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that's what's happening here. Anyone who's French want to let me know your thoughts on that phrasing? Because that phrasing is fucking weird to me. Because it's... Because if I say I'm mortified, I'm humiliated. Mortifies, mortifis, which
it can also mean like to be humbled.
Yeah, brought down a bit, abased.
Yeah. But also it can also mean like because it can be humiliated, but I've also heard it being used as like to humble someone or to put down someone. So
yeah, I do believe it means more that one. So the schizophrenic, the schizos, those who are, as they've been talking about, sort of existing at sort of the edges of society, creating new, doing things. They're not necessarily hyperproductive themselves as elements, but zombies are the humbled schizo, good for work, brought back to reason. That phrasing, I think, fits better. Because that's kind of, so to just go into it a little bit, they've got the phrasing that continues. In this sense, the primitive and the barbarian, with their ways of coding death, are children in comparison to modern man, and is axiomatic. So many unemployed are needed, so many deaths. We have a wild way of handling death now. Primitive, they had ritualistic ways of dealing with death. They dealt with that. We talked about that. The way that the barbarian or the despotic coded death was basically from on high, and it was an edict. It was chosen for you by the king. That mentality is sort of how to deal with death as it happens. We almost have justifications for death that is happening in horrifying numbers. They use the example, the Algerian war doesn't kill more people than weekend automobile accidents. I've had someone say that about Gaza, that we lost more people in COVID. It's like, like, so that was cool? Like, it's like you're not making a good, it's that this is how people talk about these things as horrific. But that's kind of their point. These older systems don't have ways of coding death that make it this powerful, that work this fucking well. We really nail it. Modern man, the capitalist, really nails this shit. We do a fucking really good job, to say the least. And it's because, they kind of continue the phrasing, because that's the whole point here, modern man raves to a far greater extent. We play at madness more than the primitive or the despotic. We rave. We extol our fantasies. We extol delirium. We rave to a far greater extent. Our delirium is a switchboard to telephones. He gives orders to the world. He doesn't care for ladies. He's brave too. This whole little bit here, chapter 35. I'm 99% sure I know who this is. I just want to make sure I don't get it wrong, because I got it wrong last week and it's going to eat at me. So I'm trying not to do that again. Two seconds.
When you're sort of saying that, or rather when like you're sort of reading that, what came to mind immediately was like Hamlet, because he explicitly says like, I'm pretending to be manic, right? Because of these like anxieties and everything, so I'm going to pretend to be mad. Right? And so then everybody else is like, is he actually mad or is he not? And it's like, he says, I'm not, but I'm going to act this way. Right? And it's kind of like this, you kind of get this sense of interiority that you kind of didn't have in medieval works. Whereas now in Hamlet, right, you do have this like, oh, well, I'm going to play, I'm going to rape, I'm going to, right? Would that be something similar, or?
I believe so, and I'm trying to find exactly the quote. That's the problem. I want to make sure I get this right. Sorry, it's going to be 2 seconds. Because there's a... I should know this anyway, and I don't know why I don't have a version of... Fuck it. Just go to the fucking... I have the actual book, Brooks. Why aren't you just using the book? I don't know, Brooks. Why don't you use the book? All right, and it's 35. It's Celine from La Hernay. And it's all in French everywhere. Of course it is, Celine. Always Celine. That's okay. Celine is a fucking interesting writer. They quote Celine quite a bit. Celine fucking hates humanity. I don't know how else to phrase it. 32. Celine is like a very, very nihilistic author. Very, very, very nihilistic author. And This is like, sorry, go for it. Someone's got a thing, please. Aerobics. I don't know if you know you're transmitting. And left. All right. All right, fair enough. I'm not going to stop you from leaving. Celine's complicated. I'm trying to figure out how to go about it. But this isn't written in like the this is deeply sardonic, deeply misanthropic, and nihilistic. Modern man raves to a far greater extent. Delire, and the phrasing is actually really different in the French. Modern man, I think the phrase they use is delire. Again, ranting and raving is not really the thing. Let's see. Where would I... 2 seconds, sorry. So it's very specific language. I'm fascinated by it because it's just different enough. So, le homme moderne délire bien davantage. You would say like raves, raves in a delirium, expresses delirium, raves to a far greater extent. Delirium's more. His delirium, and delirium is a particular phrasing for DNG. It's a very particular phrasing for this. Yeah, Celine's troublesome, as someone mentions in chat. We'll just say there's a little anti-Semitism around. Like, Nazi-ish is a cute way to put it. I would say this is not a, well, Nietzsche was misunderstood. This is a, nope. Celine's kind of a fucking prick. Like, this is actually saying the thing. So, just mentioning. Careful there. That's why I'm trying to be very careful with how I talk about Celine. Because this is Celine has some decent writing. And some of it's quite lovely. The point they're making by using this, the delirium is a switchboard with 13 telephones. He gives orders to the world. He does not like ladies. He's decorated left and right. In man's game, the death instinct, the silent instinct, decidedly well placed, perhaps next to egoism. It holds the place of zero in roulette. The casino always wins. Death being there, coming back, but it's particularly dealing with it in a capitalistic fashion. The wording around all this, the casino always wins. It's capitalism with death. That both are systems that can't be beaten because of how they're playing it. It holds a zero in roulette. It's the death drive as zero in roulette is the houses always win. The zero is basically a statistical advantage for the casino. The death instinct is basically house's rules, house's edge, that you might say, that the house has in roulette. That's the idea that Celine's playing with here. He doesn't like the ladies, is the misogyny of modern elements, basically elimination of the feminine and value of masculine domination, which is probably how Celine means it, and not in a positive way, but again, Celine's complicated. And like all of this is just making fun of the modern sort of stature, the modern thing that's happening. It's mocking it. It's mocking it. It's mocking it. It's mocking it across all of this. And then they get out of it. They finally get out. And then I think we continue from there. Yeah. House always wins, so too does death. Law of large numbers works for death. It's now or never that we must take up a problem we left hanging. They mentioned from a few paragraphs ago. Once it is said that capitalism works on the basis of the decoded flux as such, how is it that it is infinitely further removed from desiring production? Because they've said this. They've talked about it being infused. Capitalism works on the decoded flux directly, as they've said. But how come it's infinitely removed as well? How come it's more removed than with the primitive or barbarian systems? Those things code and overcode the flux. They necessarily are more removed. How is it that capitalism is somehow far, infinitely so, from desiring production? This is the paradox that they've kind of been setting up through most of the book, but really hitting on as we get towards death and all of these things. And so why is this weird thing somehow more repressive, despite not being like literal, like it's this weird backwards thing. They're kind of mentioning their own sort of paradoxes they've laid out. And then they continue. Once it is said desiring production is itself a decoded, deterritorialized production, how do we explain capitalism? With its axiomatic statistics performs an infinitely vaster repression of this production than do the preceding regimes, which nonetheless did not lack the necessary repressive means. They still had repressive means. They still did repression. We went through that in chapter 3. But the question is, if desire is kind of decoded and deterritorialized socially, how come capitalism, which operates through decoding, because the schizo is also decoding, capitalism is decoding, wouldn't this seems great? But why is this now repressing desire somehow more thoroughly than other systems? We've seen that the molar statistical aggregates of social production were in a variable relationship of affinity, affinity with, this is a lot of words, with the molecular formations of desire and production. This is a lot. But they were talking not just in this section, but also chapter 3, chapter 1 and 2, the whole book. They've kind of been going through these large-scale social structures as having varying degrees of compatibility with desiring production as a process itself, right? At a small scale, these things interact differently. They play differently. They work differently. And so they have the line, what must be explained is that the capitalist aggregate is the least affinal. At the very moment it decodes and deterritorializes with all its might. This is a big final statement. And it's the last sentence of the paragraph. But what they're saying is that the explanation for this apparent contradiction that they're going to be explaining, which is the death instinct, as they sort of talk about it. Again, this disembodied death, this mistaking of the model for everything, but death inside of capital and how it's become part of every moment and how it's in there and how capitalism uses it. There's this weird thing that actually at the moment that capitalism is decoding and deterritorializing, it's the least affinal, it has the least affinity with desire itself, despite seemingly sharing. And that's the break, which is the death instinct creating this. And again, the death instinct, these elements, they're not saying don't exist. All of these things are material. They don't exist as symbolic transcendent elements. These are still things that are operant within capitalism, and how they're operant is more within desiring production. So they want us to kind of step away from thinking through, oh, well, it's this transcendent. No. It's death as it's being dealt with and as it's part of this very process. The conditions of life itself within capital actually are creating this way that somehow through this extraction of things, we somehow have separated death from this process and actually are somehow further away than ever and able to also repress. There is no freedom to be found in capitalism. The death drive, the death instinct is doing that. And next week we will continue that because it's kind of a lot, to be very, very simple. It's kind of a fucking huge amount that we're going to be going through because this is a big paragraph. And then the next paragraph is a big one. And the next, we'll probably get through 2 or 3 paragraphs next week. And it is basically what I would say is an answer to Nick Land and his push for the death instinct as he sees it and how he's handling it. It's where you start to see some of the places that he diverges, which is a different reading entirely than I have, but we'll make our way through that next week. I need to get running. It's 10 after 2. Please, if you have a question or comment, go for it.
Yeah. So would you say that capitalism is kind of like, working with the death instinct, like Nietzsche's aesthetic ideal?
Yes.
And that, okay.
It's similar.
So
I wouldn't. When we talk about how they're operant and how they're playing, the big things to remember is that Nietzsche wasn't like. It would be better if we never had the aesthetic ideal. Like, he doesn't talk about things like that. It's not these grand good and evil. Again, we're getting beyond that with Nietzsche, quite literally, as he says. But with the aesthetic ideal, it is somehow still the force, the will within things. In the aesthetic ideal, finds something to overcome. The cut one makes in oneself becomes the thing to overcome because we need something to overcome. So it's kind of desire begetting desire, despite everything else, because it can't help it. That force is continually moving. Desire is no different. It's still happening. But now that we have the death instinct, this separate, larger thing with anti-production and how it's interacting and how it's playing, and the introduction of it as death, as this outside force, this outside constant pressure, then suddenly we have a completely different thing. Just the opening bit of the next paragraph. For them, the answer is the death instinct. If we call instinct in general the conditions of life historically and socially determined by the relations of production and anti-production in a system. So instinct, they're kind of like moving to a different place. When we talk about capital and we say within capital, there are historically and socially determined things that are the relations of production and anti-production within the system. These things push forward forces that we can call an instinct. And in this case, it's the death instinct itself that he's talking about being produced by the system and all of these interactions, the drive itself, you could say.
So
does that make sense?
Would you consider that greed is kind of part of that aesthetic ideal in capitalism?
I would have to have a long conversation about what greed means, because greed is, I think, one of those things we would end up having the same similar conversation with that we would have about death. What does greed mean? We disembody it. We separate it from things. It's like, well, it's the drive to have more money. Is it really that? Because that eternal pit of things that's constantly moving forward. How does that thing? We're naming a process or a large scale set of circumstances and social realities and interrelations a single drive that is greed, just like we do with lust, for example. But it's not really lust. Lust is more complicated than just lust. There's other things in there. I think we even went through lust a little bit, actually. So like that thing that we're playing with is a little bit more. And
it seems like greed can be associated with anal retention, right?
Yes. The proper control and holding on to things and knowing when to expel is, and again, psychoanalytic at its core, very much from even just how I described it. Very much.
And that would be something like, a distortion of the drive, and also, part of that death drive, death instinct as a principle. Yeah. So instead of release, instead of allowing the release of desiring production, you just hold it. You just try to hoard all that stuff, retain it, retention.
Cool. I have to run. I have to get to the restroom. I've got a bunch of shit to do. I'm going to be doing another stream Saturday, open hours, around the same time, 1:30ish in the afternoon. And we'll be going back through this. And I think I'll be probably bringing out even more Klosowski, because I think I'm starting to see that this section is just deeply, deeply involved in all of that. But with that, I'm going to say thank everyone for joining. It's been lovely. Always is. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys soon enough.